Does God expect us to forgive everyone? Part 2. Hi, welcome to today's little lesson on my back porch. Thanks so much for joining me. If you are a regular viewer, you know that in our last little lesson, part 1 of this is now part 2. Does God expect us to forgive everyone? We laid a foundation in that little lesson. So I hope that if you haven't seen that little lesson, you will pause this one and find that one and watch that one first, because we're going to build on what we talked about last time. But last time, a brief review, we looked at the two proof texts. They are Matthew 6, verse 12, 13, 14 or so, Mark 11, 25, where Jesus, very soberly warned us that our being forgiven by God was contingent upon us forgiving others. But that's not everything the Bible has to say about forgiveness. And when people take those couple of passages and try to build a doctrine about forgiveness, they often get very unbalanced quickly, because that's, again, not the only thing the Bible has to say on the subject. And so in this lesson, I want to begin to look at the balance and see what God really expects of us. And so I thought it would be neat in this lesson to go way back in the beginning, because a lot of people think God's changed, but he hasn't changed. And then some people think that God's expectations, his moral and ethical expectations, have changed. And I guess there's a little bit of truth to that, but not near as much as what some people say, because, ethics and morals are absolute. And, we find the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself in the law of Moses. That's not a new covenant, exclusive new covenant commandment. It's the second greatest commandment according to Jesus in the Mosaic Law. And Paul quotes it in his epistles as if it's binding upon Christians, because guess what? It is. Okay, it's one of those moral, ethical aspects of the law of Moses that actually existed before the law of Moses. I mean, God's been teaching people to love their neighbor and to love their enemy even before the law of Moses was given, because he wrote it in their consciences. Everybody knows that you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. Everyone knows you're actually supposed to be kind to your enemies. But nevertheless, that concept, of course, carried over into the new covenant law, the law of Christ. But let's go back and see the very first time God told anybody to love their neighbor as themselves, and see if we can get some insight as to what he was really after there, okay? And so this is Leviticus chapter 19. Leviticus is part of the law of Moses, and verse number 17, God said to the people of Israel, you shall not hate, now who? You shall not hate who? You shall not hate the devil? He didn't say that. You shall not hate the people that are the pagan nations that I'm going to eventually tell you to go in and wipe them out. No. Here's the commandment. You shall not hate your fellow countrymen in your heart. So a specific commandment for a specific people in speaking about their relationship with a specific group. People of Israel, don't hate your fellow countrymen in your heart. So God was concerned, even back then, in spite of what some folks try to tell us. People say, the law of Moses has dealt with outward sins. No, it didn't. Here it deals with inward sins. Don't hate your fellow countrymen in your heart. So when someone says, well, the old covenant dealt with, outward sins, and the new covenant in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talked about, he's concerned about not just external things, but internal things, and that was new. No, it's not new. That's wrong. That's false teaching. Thou shalt not covet your neighbor's goods and covet your neighbor's wife. The coveting is something of the heart. That's in the 10 Commandments, okay? We're about to read the second greatest commandment according to Jesus, and God was speaking about people's hearts. You shall not hate your fellow countrymen in your heart. Now look at this. You may surely reprove, or some versions say rebuke your neighbor, but shall not incur sin because of him. So I love it. There's some insight. So I guess it's possible to reprove or rebuke your neighbor and not be motivated by hatred for your neighbor. Revelation. And it is. it's possible to reprove or rebuke your neighbor out of love for your neighbor, because your neighbor needs reproved or rebuked for whatever reason. Most cases would be because, he sinned against you. We mostly are concerned about when people sin against us. We are concerned when they sin against other people. So you might rebuke your neighbor if he sins against somebody else. Sure. But don't hate him. You reprove him out of love, not out of hatred. So that eliminates all name calling. And Jesus addressed this in the Sermon on the Mount. If you call your brother a good for nothing, if you call your brother a fool, now you're resorting to calling names rather than gently, graciously pointing out to your neighbor where he's missed the mark and how it's caused a breach in your relationship. And because you value that relationship, you're gently approaching him because you want to be reconciled and you want to restore. But of course, obviously, what's implied is that reconciliation is predicated upon coming to a mutual understanding. And so that's why you're helping your neighbor see what he's woefully ignorant of. Or maybe he's not ignorant of, but still needs to be confronted. God goes on to describe, contrast what a person who hates might do. You shall not, this is verse 18 of Leviticus 19, you shall not take vengeance. So, don't take vengeance. Nor bear any grudge against the sons of people. Well, there's a heart issue, isn't it? Hatred in the heart, grudge in the heart. And, I don't know if you realize it, but holding a grudge against somebody is a minor form of taking vengeance, because when you hold a grudge against someone, you avoid them. If you do, come in close and have a close encounter with them, you don't speak to them. And so that's a form of vengeance, a minor form of vengeance. But God says, don't do either one of those. Don't take vengeance, and don't be holding a grudge. See, but he just said a second ago, you can reprove him. You see, so how do you get over the temptation to take vengeance, or how do you avoid holding a grudge? You try to work it out. And if you can't work it out, guess what? God has a whole court system in Israel set up that you can go before other Israelite judges, and that's a way that you can get justice. And that's actually a form of love, because when you get justice, even if you're seeking damages against a person who has wronged you, you're helping them to learn a lesson that will avoid them from, prevent them, hopefully, from harming others like that person harmed you. You see, justice teaches people to love. And again, so we're going a little bit deeper in our understanding of relationships. Now, we haven't even come to that second greatest commandment yet in this. You shall not take vengeance, nor shall you bear a grudge against the sons of your people, but, now here it comes, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There it is. So we've gotten insight as to what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. This is what God was talking about. If you love your neighbor as yourself, you don't have hatred in your heart towards him or her. But that doesn't mean, if you love your neighbor as yourself, that you never would confront them for their sin against others, or that you love or care about, or sin against yourself. No, it doesn't mean that at all. According to what we just read here, God's giving us some insight, okay? And if you love your neighbor yourself, you will not take vengeance, nor will you hold a grudge. But again, it's implied in this short little passage, it's 2 verses, Leviticus 19, verses 17 and 18, that confrontation is perfectly in order when there's conflict. Right? You're tempted to hold a grudge. You're tempted to get vengeance when there is conflict. And this harmonizes beautifully with what Jesus said. But it doesn't harmonize beautifully with what some Christians say, and even what some preachers say about how when someone wrongs you, you should instantly forgive them. Well, there's, they got a little bit of truth there, but they're missing out on these other essential components that everyone knows are a part of successful relationships, and that is, when there's conflict, there has to be confrontation if there's going to be reconciliation, and there has to be an apology, a confession made on the part of the offender that then is reciprocated with forgiveness. I mean, how hard is that to understand? Yet preachers preach like that's not a part of human experience. If you're married, for example, have you ever had a conflict with your spouse? Well, does it work just to sweep it under the rug, When again, some things, minor offenses, when a person doesn't know any better, or, and you can just muster up the mercy within you to just say, well, if they knew better, they would have done better. So I just won't take into account. Okay, great. But I'm talking about things that are, cause a breach in a relationship. It's just, you just can't continue to live in harmony with that person because this offense just keeps flashing up. So you're going to have to talk about it. And any successful marriage, even non-Christians got this figured out. When the Christians sometimes don't have it figured out. Well, I have a conflict with my spouse. We need to talk about it. And it's probably best that I don't come out, confront them by swinging my fists at them or name calling them or degrading them or saying, well, you are just like your mother. Well, that's a stupid thing to say because not only insulting your spouse, but that's a double insult. You're spewing something that shouldn't be coming out of your mouth. No, conflict is best handled with gentleness and love and consideration and, sandwiching the point of confrontation in between positive statements. Are you still out there? Okay, so that's just from Leviticus chapter 19 and verses 17 and 18. What Jesus taught harmonizes perfectly with that. Okay, and in our next lesson, we're going to talk about some things that Jesus said, and of course it harmonizes with what was said in Leviticus 19, 17, and 18, because Jesus is the author of Leviticus 19, 17, and 18. Okay, it's really not that difficult. Just look at everything the Bible says on any given subject, and you come up with a balanced, harmonious understanding of that subject. All right. If you've never been to heavensfamily.org, let me encourage you to take a look there. Ministry that I've been blessed to found and lead for almost 2 decades. And incidentally, when people put in the comments, how come you don't engage in all the comments and answer questions and so forth in the comments? It's because I have a lot of other things I'm involved in doing. And, we do have a person on our staff who reads those comments, and they will send me the ones that they think are relevant and appropriate. So I do get to read them, but to respond to everybody and so forth, I don't have enough time. But anyways, Heaven's Family is a ministry that's working in about 40 countries to care for the needs of the least of these, something Jesus said we should all be involved in. And let me encourage you to get involved. All right, that would be great. You'll be glad you did. It's a way to lay up treasure in heaven. It's a way to prove your faith in Jesus and prove your love for Jesus by loving the least of these. That's what he himself taught. All right, until next time, may the Lord continue to bless you.